The call came at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in February, and Marcus almost didn't take it. He had been on shift since 4 in the afternoon. 7 hours of highway exits and downtown drops, and one woman who had left a half-eaten bag of fast food on the back seat, which he had stopped to throw away because the smell was already working its way into the upholstery. His phone showed the fare request blinking on the map in the Eastfield neighborhood, 3 miles from the nearest transit hub. Temperature dropping toward 18 degrees. Wind chill advisory in effect. He sat at the red light and watched the request pulse. He had enough for the night. He needed his bed. He accepted it anyway. He always did. What Marcus did not know as he turned left on Garfield and headed east through the sleet was that the woman waiting at the corner of Eastfield and 9th was not just a stranded passenger. She was the regional vice president of operations for Summit Courier Group, the parent company of the dispatch service Marcus had driven for during the past 3 years. She was returning from a site visit that had run 6 hours long. Her car had died at the curb. Her phone was down to 4% battery, and she had requested a driver while standing in the cold in a blazer and a single-layer dress, because her coat was locked in the trunk of a car that would not open. She did not know his name. She did not know he had been with Summit's contracted fleet for 3 years, had a satisfaction rating of 4.9 out of 5 across more than 2,000 rides, and had submitted 3 separate formal requests for a shift supervisor position that had each been declined without a personal response. She was just cold, and he was just the driver coming to get her. Marcus Webb pulled up at 11:52. He was 38 years old, tall and lean, in the way that comes from years of long hours and not quite enough rest, and the jacket he wore was a heavy quilted thing, navy blue, the kind that had kept him warm through 3 Chicago winters and still held its shape at the seams. He saw the woman at the corner under the pharmacy sign, arms crossed over her chest, shoulders drawn up. He rolled down his window. "Diane." "Yes, thank you for coming." Her voice was steady, but her teeth were close to chattering. He got out. He had the jacket off before she reached the car door. "Here," he said. "Put this on." She looked at him. He was in a long-sleeved uniform shirt, and the sleet was already hitting his forearms. "I can't take your jacket," she said. "You're not taking it," Marcus said. "I'm loaning it while we get you to the car. You'll freeze in what you have on." He held it open the way his mother had held his coats open when he was 5 years old, matter-of-fact and patient, not making a thing of it. "It's warm inside. Hop in." She put the jacket on. It swallowed her. She got in, and Marcus walked around to the driver's side in the sleet and got behind the wheel, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You can turn up the heat," Marcus said, pulling into traffic. "Dial on the left." She turned it up. She had the jacket pulled to her chin. He drove. He asked her once where she was headed, and she told him the building name on Lakeside, and he nodded and took the most direct route. He didn't ask what had brought her out this late. He did not fill the silence with chatter. He drove the way he always drove, steady, unhurried, careful over the patches of ice on Meridian Avenue. When they reached her building, she took the jacket off and handed it back to him through the partition gap. "Thank you," she said, and the word carried more weight than most people put into it. "Genuinely." "Drive safe," he said, which was habit, and then caught himself and almost smiled. "Stay warm." She was gone. He watched her badge through the lobby doors of her building, and then he pulled away, and the rest of the night was 2 more rides and a stop for coffee, and he did not think about her again. He had no reason to. Have you ever done something kind for a stranger and simply let it go? Not because you expected nothing back, not as a performance, but just because it was what the moment asked for, and you answered it and then moved on. If you have, then you already understand what Marcus did that night, and you might understand, by the time this story is over, what it gave back. Marcus Webb was 38 years old and had been driving commercially in the Chicago metro area since he was 26. He started with a small courier company in Logan Square, making runs across the city in a hatchback that he maintained himself to save on shop fees. He learned the streets the way his father had learned the neighborhood where he grew up, not from a map, but from repetition. From the particular timing of the light at Michigan and Wacker, from the alley behind the restaurant district that saved 4 minutes on a Friday night, from the construction patterns that shifted every spring and had to be relearned every fall. He did 3 years of long-haul routes after that, driving overnight freight between Chicago and St. Louis, between Chicago and Indianapolis, sleeping in rest stops in the cab, and listening to whatever radio station came in clean. He was good at the solitude. He had always been comfortable with the kind of quiet that most people fill with noise. The road at 2 in the morning has a particular quality, the way the world narrows down to the cone of your headlights and the white line and the hum of the engine, and Marcus found that quality restful in a way he could not have explained to someone who had not experienced it. He kept a log on those runs, a small spiral notebook wedged between the seat and the centre console, not a journal, but a record. The time he left, the weather when he crossed the state line, the weight of the load, the time he arrived. He liked the precision of it. He liked that the numbers were true. He was building towards something in those years. His uncle Gerald had run a small freight operation out of Memphis for 20 years. 2 trucks and a reliable client list, and the kind of steady income that does not make anyone rich, but does not surprise anyone either. Gerald had started it with 1 truck and a cousin who drove the second shift, and by the time Marcus was 10 years old, it had grown into the thing it would always be, modest and durable and entirely his uncle's. Marcus had watched that operation with the attention of a child who already understood that ownership was different from employment in a way that mattered, even if he could not yet have said how. He saved for 4 years on the long-haul routes. The number in his account grew slowly, the way things grow when you're patient with them. Then his knee gave out on a loading dock in Joliet on a Tuesday in November. He was 33. The surgery and the recovery took 8 months, and the medical costs moved against the savings account steadily. And when he came out on the other side, the number was smaller, and the freight operation he had been building toward had retreated back into the distance. He recertified for local dispatch work with Summit Courier Group when he was 34, and he drove, and he saved again. And the plan had taken a shape he had learned to be patient about, a longer shape now, but the same destination. He had a daughter named Bria. She was 9 years old and lived with her mother on the north side in the apartment Marcus had helped paint when they were still together, before the long-haul years had stretched too thin between them. He picked Bria up every other weekend with precision, always on time, always with something small. A book from the dollar table at the library, a scratch-off lottery ticket she was not old enough to redeem but liked to hold anyway, rubbing the grey coating off with the edge of a dime, serious about the ritual of it, a small bag of the caramel corn she only pretended not to love, pulling it toward her across the seat with the casualness of someone receiving a gift they have been hoping for. His apartment in Pilsen was 560 square feet. He paid $900 a month for it and had, over the years, made it exactly comfortable. A second-hand couch his mother had helped him carry up 2 flights of stairs the week he moved in. A kitchen that was small but functional, everything in its place, the kind of order that comes from a person who has learned to treat limited space with respect. A window that faced west and caught the late afternoon light in a way that still surprised him some days when he came home before an evening shift, the light lying across the floor in a long, warm band that moved slowly toward the wall. He was not a man who complained. This was not a performance of strength, it was simply his way of moving, the same way some people carry an umbrella without mentioning rain. When the first supervisor application went unanswered, he asked his fleet manager, a man named Dell, what the process was. Dell told him the HR department reviewed all applications. Marcus asked if he should follow up. Dell told him they'd reach out if interested. They did not reach out. Marcus filed the second application 6 months later, this time attaching his performance metrics. 4.9 rating, 94% on-time percentage, 0 safety incidents in 3 years. He had typed the numbers carefully and printed the document on the good paper he kept for things that needed to be taken seriously. He sealed it in an envelope and left it with Dell. He heard nothing. He filed the third application 14 months after the first, and this time he wrote a short paragraph at the end explaining what he believed he could offer in a supervisory role. Scheduling efficiency, driver retention, the kind of calm that comes from having done the job long enough to understand its pressure points, to know which problems are problems and which are weather, and to treat the difference accordingly. He printed 2 copies. He gave one to Dell and mailed one to the Summit Regional Office address listed on the company website. He never heard back. He kept driving. In March, Marcus began training a new driver named Cal. Cal was 22 and still nervous about highway merges, the particular anxiety of the gap that appears and then closes before you have committed to it. Marcus worked with him on 2 ride-alongs during off-shift hours, unpaid, sitting in the passenger seat of Cal's vehicle and saying nothing until there was something useful to say. He did not teach Cal to ignore the anxiety. He taught him to drive through it, to make the decision and trust his hands. The second ride-along was on a Wednesday evening, and they spent most of it in silence. Cal focused on the road and Marcus watching the traffic patterns with the relaxed attention of a man who has been reading a particular language for years and no longer has to translate. At one point, Cal missed a merge and had to slow down and wait for the gap to reopen, and the silence afterward was the kind that needed to be met with something. "You knew you had the space," Marcus said. "I thought I did," Cal said. "Then I wasn't sure." "You had it," Marcus said. 18 feet at least. Your lane looked clear for 400 feet ahead. The doubt moved faster than the information did. Cal was quiet. Then he said, "How do you not let the doubt move faster?" Marcus thought about this honestly. "You let it be there," he said. "You just stop asking it to drive." Cal didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Okay," in a tone that meant he would be thinking about that for a while. Cal passed his solo certification on the first try. He texted Marcus at 7:30 that morning to tell him, and Marcus was already on shift, and he read the text at a red light and sent back a single word that was true and sufficient. In April, a passenger left a laptop bag in Marcus's back seat. He noticed it 2 minutes after the drop-off when he pulled over to check his next request, and the black bag caught the corner of his eye in the rearview mirror. He turned around. The drop-off was 4 minutes away at that hour. He drove back without thinking about it in any complicated way, the same logic that had always governed these moments. Someone needed something back, and he had it. The passenger, a man named Terry, was standing on his front steps looking at his watch when Marcus pulled up. He had the face of a man who had just done the math and realized it did not add up in his favor. When Marcus got out with the bag, Terry made a sound that was not quite words. "You came back," Terry said. "You left your bag," Marcus said, and handed it over. Terry tried to give him $40. Marcus said no. Terry insisted. Marcus said no again, and he said it in the tone he reserved for things that were settled, and Terry heard it. He left a written review that ran 8 sentences and ended with the word character, which was not something reviews usually said. In May, a night shift on a Saturday brought him a passenger who asked to stop at a pharmacy and then wept quietly in the back seat, the kind of quiet weeping a person does when they are trying to hold it in and cannot entirely. The sound was small and controlled, the sound of someone who had been holding something for a long time and whose hold had finally slipped. She was going to see someone in the hospital. Marcus didn't ask who. He did not say anything that acknowledged the sound because he understood that acknowledgement in that moment would cost her something she was not ready to spend. He waited in the parking lot for 11 minutes while she composed herself. He turned on the radio low, a late-night jazz station he kept for the long stretches, and he let the sound fill the car without making any demands. When she came back, she was steadier, the way a person is steadier after the thing they feared most has started to happen. She got in and said the hospital name, and Marcus drove her there, and she said thank you in a voice that meant it, and he said, of course, in a voice that meant the same thing. None of these things were strategic. He was not building a case. He was not keeping score. He was just a man doing his job the way he had always done it, the way his mother had raised him, and the way the work itself had continued to teach him, and he did not think of the jacket on any of those mornings or evenings. It had been a cold night and a cold woman, and the obvious thing to do. He thought no more of it than he would have thought of holding a door. If you have ever watched someone like Marcus in your own life, a person who just keeps giving quietly without scorekeeping, without needing it witnessed, drop a note below. This story is for them. The site visit to the Eastfield Distribution Hub had been Diane's 4th trip to the facility since she joined Summit. She was Regional Vice President of Operations, recruited 14 months earlier from a logistics company in Atlanta, where she had spent 7 years restructuring underperforming supply chains. She was 44 years old, methodical and thorough, with the kind of patience for a problem that came from having learned, early in her career, that rushing a diagnosis almost always costs more time than it saves. She had grown up in a household where her mother worked 2 jobs and her father drove a transit bus for the city for 31 years, and she understood the interior of a working life in a way that some of her colleagues at the executive level did not. She knew that the gap between what a flaw report shows and what the flaw actually is can be wide and important. She went to facilities herself. She walked the sections herself. She took her own notes. Summit Courier Group had grown quickly in 3 years, absorbing 2 smaller dispatch companies and expanding into regional logistics without fully integrating what it had taken on. Diane had spent her first year getting her arms around the operations side of a company that had grown faster than its systems. She worked through the facilities first, then the vehicle fleet, then the routing software, and she had been working her way toward the staffing infrastructure since the fall. She had not yet reached driver services. She had not yet seen the unanswered queue. The purpose of the Eastfield visit was a scheduling audit. Diane had flagged a pattern of missed delivery windows that she traced to understaffed overnight shifts, and she went to the facility herself because the floor supervisor's reports were not giving her the full picture. She spent 6 hours on the floor, walked every section twice, took 40 pages of handwritten notes in the narrow spiral notebook she kept in her bag for exactly this kind of day. She talked to the people who did the work, the overnight floor lead who had been covering 2 roles since a position went unfilled in the fall, the dock coordinator who had been submitting the same equipment repair request for 3 months without response. She wrote everything down. She missed 2 calls from her assistant and 1 from her husband. When she finally wrapped at 11:15, the sleet had started and her car would not start, and her phone was at 4%. She stood at the curb for a moment, calculating. The nearest transit stop was a 30-minute walk. The wind chill was working. Her blazer was not adequate for either. She requested a car on the app, moved to the corner where the light was better, and waited. She remembered the jacket the whole ride home. She remembered the man getting out of the car, getting out, not just rolling the window down, and having the jacket off before she had taken 3 steps. She had worked in logistics for 11 years and had ridden in countless company vehicles and hired cars, and not one driver had ever gotten out of his car in winter weather to meet her on the sidewalk. He had not made a speech about it. He had not mentioned it again for the entire ride. When she handed it back, he said what sounded like a routine sign-off, except that it landed differently. She thought about the way he held the jacket open, the matter-of-fact gesture of it, like it was simply the next obvious thing. She looked at the trip receipt in her email the next morning. Driver listed as Marcus W. She gave him 5 stars and wrote 2 words in the review field, genuinely kind. Then she went to her morning meeting, and the weeks moved forward, and the Eastfield audit report took shape across March and April, and she worked her way through the pile. The staffing infrastructure review she had been building towards since the fall came into reach in June. Her assistant pulled the queue of unanswered applications from the driver services folder, and Diane spent a Friday afternoon going through them. There were 31 applications in total, submitted over 14 months, sitting unassigned and untouched in a folder created during the company's merger period, and then overlooked when the HR team was restructured. 31 people who had applied for something and heard nothing. She started at the top. She worked through them in order, pulling each applicant's performance record from the fleet database and reading the 2 documents side by side. It was slow, deliberate work. Some applications were adequate, their authors solid drivers who had not thought to articulate what they understood about the supervisory dimension of the role. A few were strong. She flagged 4 for immediate follow-up and set the others aside. Late in the afternoon, she reached a set of pages that had been folded into a standard business envelope and mailed directly to the regional office rather than submitted through the usual internal channel. She unfolded the pages. The metrics page was attached with a paperclip. 4.9 rating, 94% on time across more than 2,000 rides, 3 years of service, 0 safety incidents. She looked at these numbers for a moment, thinking about what they represented, not just the percentages, but the sustained commitment behind them. A 4.9 across 2,000 rides is not an accident. It is a practice. It is made of 1,100 nights of doing the job correctly when no one is verifying it, of returning the bag and making the quiet wait and holding the jacket open in the sleet. Then she read the paragraph at the bottom. Scheduling efficiency. Driver retention. The particular calm that comes from having done the job long enough to understand its pressure points. She read it twice. She turned to the cover page. The name was Marcus. Just Marcus and the initial W. She sat very still. She went to her ride history in the app, something she rarely did, and she found the February trip, the one from Eastfield and 9th to Lakeside. The driver field read Marcus W., the sleet on his forearms. The jacket held open without comment. Drive safe, stay warm. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside her office window, the June evening was moving into its longer light, the city held in the particular amber of late afternoon. And Diane Okafor sat with the weight of a folder that had been doing her job without her knowing it, and she felt the peculiar gravity of a coincidence that is not quite a coincidence, because what it actually is a pattern that becomes visible all at once. She had not known when he handed her that jacket that he had been trying for over a year to be seen by the same company that employed him. She had not known that 3 applications had gone unanswered in a folder she had not yet opened. She had not been watching for him. He had simply been the driver who came when she was cold, and he had gotten out of his car. She called Dell, the fleet manager, at 3:15. "Tell me about your driver, Marcus," she said. "The one on the local dispatch roster, 3 years of service." Dell was quiet for a second, the brief pause of a person gathering. "Marcus? Yeah, Marcus is one of our best. 4.9, never a complaint. He's been trying to move into a supervisor role for a while now, but the applications always seem to—" Dell stopped. "I don't actually know where they went." "I do," Diane said. "I have all 3 of them in front of me." She paused. "I'd like to set up a conversation with him next week. Can you arrange that?" Dell said he could. Marcus got the call from Dell on a Thursday morning. He was at his kitchen table with coffee, running through his schedule for the week, when Dell's number came up on his phone. Dell told him the regional VP's office had requested a meeting. Marcus asked what it was regarding. Dell said it was regarding his supervisor applications. And then he was quiet in a way that changed the texture of the sentence. "All 3 of them," Marcus said. "All 3, Dell said. Marcus sat with this for a moment. 3 years. He had been working and filing and continuing to work, and the applications had gone into the company's interior and returned nothing. And he had not let that nothing become the meaning of his work. He had not let it become a grievance he carried. He had simply kept going. The same way he had kept going after the knee, and after the savings account, and after every gap and setback that the years had put in his path. He kept going because that was what he was, because stopping had never seemed like a useful response. And now someone had opened the folder, and the folder had been holding him, and he did not know what to do with the feeling that moved through him. Something between relief and the wariness of a man who has learned not to read too much into things that have not happened yet. "Okay," he said. "Thank you, Dell." He put the phone down and sat with his coffee for a minute. Then he went back to his schedule. He told Bria about it that Saturday, sitting at the kitchen table while she worked on a school project. She had a map of the Great Lakes spread across half the table, each lake coloured in a different shade of blue, and she was adding careful labels in the handwriting she had been practicing, small and even. He kept it plain. There was a meeting. It might be about the position he had been applying for. He did not dress it up, and he did not underdress it. He had always been careful about that with Bria, about managing the space between what might be true and what was. She looked up from the map. Her pen hovered above Lake Huron. "Is it the promotion?" she said. "Might be," Marcus said. "We'll see." She considered this with the serious calm she brought to things she had decided mattered. She looked at him for another moment, then down at the map, and then back at him. "You should wear the jacket," she said, and went back to her labels. He almost said that it was a meeting, not a job interview, that the jacket was for cold weather. He almost said it. Then he looked at his daughter with her pen steady over Lake Huron and let it go. He drove to the Summit Regional Office on a Tuesday morning in early July. He wore pressed slacks and a collared shirt he had ironed the night before, the iron moving slowly across the fabric with the same deliberateness he brought to everything. He left the jacket in the car. The building's lobby was tall and cool, marble floors, a reception desk behind which a woman in a headset confirmed his name and called upstairs. He sat in a chair near the window and watched the city move outside and thought about nothing in particular, which was a skill he had developed over many years of waiting. He didn't recognize Diane when the assistant led him into her office. She was a composed woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and a careful, unhurried way of looking at a person that suggested she was in the habit of forming her own opinions before speaking them. Behind her on the credenza were a small potted plant and 2 framed photographs turned at an angle he could not quite see. She stood and offered her hand. "Marcus, I'm Diane Okafor. Please sit down." She had his application on the desk and his metrics beside it. She asked him questions, measured and specific, each one landing as a genuine question rather than a checkpoint. She asked about the gap between his 3 applications and how he had continued to perform well during the time he heard nothing. She asked what he understood the pressure of a floor supervisor role to mean in a dispatch environment. Not the title of it, the actual interior of the job, the part that lives in the margins. The calls that come in after midnight, the driver who cannot make the route and the route that cannot wait, the new person who is nervous about a merge and needs someone to sit with them without making the nervousness a problem. Marcus answered each question the way he drove, clear, patient, nothing overstated. He talked about the overnight scheduling gap he had identified from riding the shifts, the handoff problem between the end-of-night crew and the early morning crew that cost time every day in small doses. He talked about what he had learned from the ride-alongs with Cal about how anxiety works in the body of a new driver and how patience is not the same as passivity, that meeting someone's fear steadily is an active thing. He talked about what 3 years of a 4.9 rating actually costs a person, the steady, unglamorous work of it, the choices that do not announce themselves as choices. Diane listened to all of it. She did not write anything down during the questions. She watched him the way a person watches when they are deciding not whether what you are saying is true, but whether you understand what you are saying. Near the end, she set her pen down and looked at him directly. "I want to ask you something that is not on the application." "All right," Marcus said. "In February," she said, "you picked up a passenger on Eastfield and 9th. Night shift. Sleet." He went still. He looked at the woman across the desk, at the reading glasses in her hair, at the steadiness of her gaze, and something rearranged itself. "The coat," he said. "The jacket," she said. "Yes." A silence passed between them, not uncomfortable. "I didn't know who you were," Marcus said. "I want to be clear about that." "I know you didn't," Diane said. "That is not a concern. It is the opposite of a concern." She held his gaze. "You got out of your car in the sleet. You had the jacket off before I reached the door. You didn't mention it again for the entire ride. When I handed it back, you said, 'Drive safe.'" She paused. "I have thought about that night several times." Marcus looked at the window beside her. The light outside was July, bright and thick, nothing like February. He thought about the pharmacy sign, the sleet on his arms, the dial on the left for heat. "She was cold," he said. "That was the whole of it." Diane was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, and that is exactly what I mean." She unfolded her hands and looked at him plainly. "I want you to know that the position you applied for 3 times is being posted this month, and your name is at the top of the list. Your record would have gotten you there regardless. What it took was someone opening the right folder." She paused. "But I also want you to know that I know who you are, not just the metrics, the person. And this company needs that, especially in the supervisory tier, people who understand that the work is made of individuals, each one carrying something the metrics cannot measure." She looked at him steadily. "The floor supervisor role at the Pilsen Hub. $12 per hour above your current rate, with a benefits tier adjustment. It is yours if you want to take the formal interview." Marcus was quiet for a moment that ran long enough that Diane tilted her head slightly, patient. "Yeah," he said, "I want to interview." The full smile she allowed then was different from her professional composure. It was warm and unguarded and quick, the smile of a person who has been waiting for a particular answer and has just heard it. "Good," she said. "My assistant will send the details today." He interviewed 3 days later with Dell and 2 members of the HR team. He was the strongest candidate. He had always been the strongest candidate. The application had known it. The metrics page had known it. All it had ever needed was the right folder. The offer letter came on a Friday afternoon. Diane signed it. Marcus was at the library with Bria when his phone buzzed with the notification. They had been there for an hour, moving through the shelves the way they always moved without a list, following whatever caught Bria's eye. She pulled books from the low shelves one at a time and read the back covers with the focused deliberation she brought to everything she cared about. And Marcus walked slowly behind her with his hands in his pockets, comfortable in the quiet. He stepped aside and opened the email. He read it once, then read it again. He went back to Bria's aisle and sat down on the low bench near the window. She looked up at him from the book in her hands, reading his face the way she had always read his face, with an accuracy he had long stopped being surprised by. "Dad, I got the job," he said. She set the book down carefully on the shelf, spine out, the way he had taught her. She looked at him with all the weight of the moment, the way she always gave important things their full due. "I told you the jacket," she said. He laughed. He had not laughed quite like that in a long time, open and complete, there in the library aisle while the light came through the tall windows, and Bria looked at him with the satisfied calm of a 9-year-old who has been proven correct about something that mattered. There are things we do when no one is watching, or when we think no one is watching, that turn out to be the truest account of who we are. Marcus had not given the jacket away as an investment. He had not returned Terry's laptop for the review. He had not sat with Cal on those ride-alongs to build a record. He was not building anything. He was just being the person he had decided, early and without ceremony, to be. The world had watched. The world keeps its own ledger, even when we do not. Marcus started the floor supervisor position at the Pilsen hub on the third Monday in August. His first week, he introduced himself to every driver on his shift by name and role, not because it was protocol, but because he remembered what it meant to work under a supervisor who knew you, who understood that the name on the badge was attached to a whole life. His second week, he restructured the gap in the overnight scheduling that had been bleeding late starts for 14 months. A small adjustment in the handoff procedure between the end of night and early morning crews that cost nothing and bought 23 minutes back in the aggregate, which mattered. In September, a new driver named Rosa asked him if he had tips for handling difficult passengers. He sat with her in the break room for 20 minutes and told her what he knew, the same way he had sat with Cal, the same way someone had once sat with him. He did not make her feel that asking the question was a cost. He told her that the hardest passengers were usually the most frightened, and that most fear, when you meet it steadily and without taking it personally, quiets down on its own. Rosa thanked him and went back to her vehicle, and Marcus went back to his desk, and neither of them made anything more of it than it was. He picked Bria up that Friday evening. He brought caramel corn and a book she had asked for the week before, and he brought the jacket, which he had taken to a seamstress in his building to repair a seam that had started to split sometime in the spring. It was back to itself now, the stitching clean and tight. He folded it over the back of the chair by the door, which was where it always went. Bria sat at the kitchen table working on a reading assignment, the book open flat and a pencil in her hand. Marcus stood at the stove making the simple soup he made on Friday nights, onion and carrot and whatever stock he had, the recipe passed down from his mother's mother and carried through the family without ever being written down. The window faced west. The late afternoon light came through the way it always did, laying itself across the table where Bria sat and across the floor between the kitchen and the door. "You happy?" Bria asked without looking up from the book, the way she always asked the things that mattered most, sideways as if the question were passing through on its way somewhere else. Marcus stirred the soup. He looked at the light on the floor. He thought about the folder that had held his name for over a year in a building he had never been inside. He thought about the sleet on his forearms and the matter-of-fact way a jacket gets passed from one person to another. No speech, no fanfare, just warmth moving toward the person who needs it. "Yeah," he said. "I am." Bria nodded once, satisfied, and made a note in the margin of her book. The soup was ready a few minutes later. They ate together at the table while the light moved slowly along the floor toward the wall, and outside the city went on the way cities do, and the jacket hung on the back of the chair where it had always been. Navy blue and warm, the stitching holding. Some people say that kindness is its own reward, and they mean it as a small comfort, a thing to say when there is nothing else to say. But what this story knows is something different. Kindness, done faithfully and without calculation, keeps a ledger the person giving it never sees. It records what you did not write down. And sometimes, on an ordinary Friday evening in a small apartment in Pilsen, with soup on the stove and your daughter working quietly at the table, it pays you back in the precise shape of what you gave. If Marcus's story moved something in you, tell us what it stirred. And if you know someone who keeps giving quietly, who does the small right thing without waiting for anyone to notice, share this with them. We have another story here for you when you are ready. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes.